Hello and welcome to the first episode of Beyond the Flame podcast, a new thing from Ed and I where we're talking beyond the products and actually in theory and going deeper into knowledge. We don't want to talk about products here, so we're talking about the problems in the real world and we'll figure it out from there. So,
Absolutely.
I'm Dan, I'm Ed, we are at Appfire Solution Architects, so let's crack on.
So again, like Dan said, we're going to be talking about thought leadership, higher level processes that impact how you would implement some of your business cases and strategies. So, and today, Darren, what do we have?
We are handling major incident comms. So how do we take a look when those smoke signals fire at how do we best address that kind of issue? So every company will always have incidents. It's the way of life. You're never going to run very smoothly. So how do we best look at doing it? I mean, Ed, in your experience, what are the kind of things that you've seen before?
Smoke signals.
Yeah.
Smoke signals.
Yeah, the old-fashioned way with the
Yeah,
just
get it.
yeah.
Right. No, so you have your service tests that your businesses will utilize, and so those service requests will come in, and depending on the priority, we would be able to see, is this a sub one, a sub two, and if it's a sub one, we want to make sure that we want to send out specific notifications. So it's almost like a tiered level depending on the priority. So is this something that can be addressed within 2 or 3 days, or is it, hey, server's down?
Yeah,
we need to get everyone. We need to swarm, get a war room, send out everything.
So one of the things that I think is really important when you start talking about major incidences and trying to get that connection, as you have to, we actually almost want to start being proactive in terms of the setup and things like that, right? I know incidences by their very nature are reactive.
Yep.
Right. But how can we best proactively do that? So, things like status page or a status page of their equivalent, the ability to automatically share information straight to a customer,
Yep.
where they don't necessarily have to raise tickets and get in contact with the.
And another one, another way of doing that is to have templates for specific types of incidents. So if you have sub one server down, we have a template for that specific incident. Or if this is just a minor issue that we need to get addressed in the next day or two, you have a template for that one, so you can automatically and consistently send out those notifications.
I think that's one of the most important things actually is about being uniform in their approach. I mean, in previous lives that we've done as consultants, one of the biggest thing that we always ran into personally, and I'm sure you would have had the same, but when we run into those issues, it would be like, oh, our customers aren't very happy with us. We'd never deal with things in kind of the same way or whatever it might be. And I think the uniformity means that when somebody does have a problem, which will be inevitable, you know exactly where to look in the notification to understand maybe what service is down, what category it is, the description of the incident, as well as kind of the next steps of the day. So I think having that uniformity approach is very, very good.
It's the consistency. So you know exactly what time incident is coming, what kind of communication is going to come out of that on a consistent basis. So it comes part of the culture of your organization,
and that is a massive element of it as well. All right, you'll hear it a lot from us over the next 10 weeks, but it's an incredibly important factor. Is the cultural aspect, right? And it's a reason why I think quite a few things struggle to kind of get going. So I actually just want to kind of touch back on the template thing that you just mentioned, right? I think this is really interesting because something that I noticed in, again, part of my previous life when I was working at a retail business was that they using Jira. I know we're not mentioning products, but it's going to happen every now and then. There are stories, right? So in order to make sure that they were as quickly but uniformly telling people is that they were basically building all of their major incident cons from Jira fields. Okay? So it would, as normal, say the service, it would say the priority, it would say the assignee, the major incident manager, all of those pieces of information. And they would click a button and they would open up a new screen and they would type the message in a comment field. And then they actually had automation. It was sending that email out straight from Jira saying, here's the com, here's all the pieces of like basic information, and then the comment. And then they were using SLAs to make sure that they were staying on track
Yeah.
to send that hourly. So I thought that was a really interesting way of doing it.
Yeah, and even if you use some of the automation applications out there to help create these templates and create these specific items. So if you see a Sev 1 and you need to make sure that certain fields are required, or you can actually pre-populate the description field with certain parameters that you need to understand, like time zone, when it happened, all the pertinent information.
So I think what would be really interesting actually is kind of thinking about the channels of which we do. I just mentioned about emails now. Emails are the very traditional way of releasing that kind of thing, but is it necessarily the right way? So
It's not the quickest.
no. Okay. So what would be the, if I was a business coming to you, what would you recommend, or how would you go about finding what tool would be right?
Yeah, so I think you have to define out how you're going to design your operations / on-call protocol. So is that going to be through Slack? So you can get real-time information going to a specific Slack channel, or is that going to be SMS notification? So like, for example, in Jira Ops Genie, you can get the SMS notifications, who's on call kind of thing. So, what's the quickest way and the best way that a company is using those channels?
So I actually think that's a really interesting point. And obviously, we're here at Team 25. I know it's kind of timestamp here, but
We're here.
we were here. Last year, everyone else this week, how they are making it as efficient as possible to get the information you need, no matter where you are within their platform, right? So whether you're in Confluence, you're a Jira, you can search and get any information you need.
Right.
I am seeing so many more things about the channels of engagement and being where your customers are. So if it's, like you said, it's Slack, is it Teams? If they're external, do we have access to, and you're making a product, can we put the notifications there?
Yeah.
We have to make it as easy as,
is there some kind of in-app pop-up as well where you have that going on? Yeah.
There are so many things. And I think that's an incredibly important tool, because that is the most proactive you can be.
Right.
Is, hey, I'm going to give you that information right where you need, where you're working, and that's the best. I think the other aspect is, and we'll touch on this in future episodes, but is also making sure that customers can raise things as quickly as possible in where they are, right? We've got those open channels of engagement to make that journey.
Make it as easy as possible, whether they're submitting the requests through their phone, through WhatsApp, whether they're, on the other computer, whatever. So we get, like you said, make it easy as possible for them to submit that ticket. And then conversely, make it easy as possible for the service desk agents to notify the right people that need to address it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move thinking about roles. Who would you expect that major incident to come from?
Yeah, so and like you said, we'll probably touch on this on future episodes, but usually from service desk perspective, you're going to have someone that's kind of like the triage manager, or someone who's going to be the first line of figuring out what is going on from the priorities perspective, and how do we need to route this.
Yeah.
If you don't have automation that's already taking care of this, you're going to have like a triage manager that's going to be able to take a look at this and say, hey, priority 1, let's route this accordingly.
So I think that it's really important actually to make sure that you've got those clear roles defined.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, if you and I picked up the same issue and then all of a sudden we're like, oh, we just send that, it doesn't look good, right? And you need to make sure you've got that set up.
So one of the things that you also need to make sure that you have well thought out and designed is your support process, in case you have like a chase the sun philosophy where you're going to hand off the ticket to another time zone. Obviously, if it's a Sev 1, you would probably have people that are going to be swarming that and take care of the issue until it's addressed. But if it's a Sev 2, 3, 4, they can have a little more leeway, and you hand that off to a different time zone. Then you need to make sure that you have the right handoff information, and that the roles for that person match up to what needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredibly important to make sure you have the right roles defined at the right time. So, is your major incident manager, if you're an organization maybe of that scale that has, do you have one? Do you know that exactly when you're going to engage them? Maybe when it goes from just a singular incident to a major incident. when you talk about escalations, what's the process for doing that? And have you clearly defined all the previous steps that you've done to go in to be able to talk about that? So I think that's incredibly important to get right. And it's the first step in to be able to make effective communication strategies.
So we've kind of talked about the roles and the channels. So what about notification frequency?
So this is a really, I think this is where it's going to differ from company to company, right? I think one of the first things you have to bear in mind is, what does your SLA contracts say?
Correct.
Right. So if you are working in this industry and, and your customers expect that it's an hourly thing during an incident until it's resolved, then that is your cadence. You have to be, or when a significant thing happens. So it might only be 20 minutes, but it's the next significant thing. But at minimum, your SLA contracts will probably define your frequency. But as standard, what I have seen is it's hourly or when the next significant event happens.
You need to have that cadence defined so people know what to expect depending on what type of incident it is. So they can plan accordingly that, hey, I need to check in every half hour to make sure, if I need to do something. But then it's also a balance of, making sure you're being fully transparent with the communications, but not inciting full-on panic if you don't have to.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be really important that companies look at the cadences that they want to go for, maybe their contracts and stuff. And then to make it that visual that you were just talking about is, I think what you'll start to see is people using like an SLA clock, like a pseudo clock in, for example, like JSM, where they're saying, hey, it's getting close to an hour, you need to send the next message, and you get that out. Or you can then visualize out to the customers, hey, you put that on the portal that the next update's only an hour away, and you kind of do that. It's really important to make it visual.
Yeah, it's important to have that cadence defined, but also, while we have these metrics going, another important thing would be to, hey, we need to have a dashboard that can display these metrics, and maybe it's different personas that need to see it. So maybe you have your support operations leader that needs to see everything that's going on, or you have like maybe your incident service desk people that, just to see kind of what they're managing or what they're assigned to, kind of thing. So you have different metrics that you're going to be able to display as well. So say those are going to be important as well.
Absolutely. I think what you also have to consider, or what may start to play a role in some of these, like how the frequency aspect might be regional based. So, do I, again, maybe because of contract, maybe just because of expectations, maybe APAC needs more high touch frequencies than maybe EMEA does.
Absolutely.
Right. But your business will be defined by those things.
Yep. Awesome. So, all right. So Dan, we talked about time-based, SLA things. What about some enterprises and organizations try to use milestone-based?
Yeah. So Atlassian is part one of them, actually. So I know that they do have SLA agreements in place, especially for their cloud platform, as an example. But in terms of when they do major incident comms, and basically if you're not an enterprise, right, is they do it by miles. So they actually have their own status page for each of the product lines. When something goes wrong, it immediately flags on status page. There's a visual color. Obviously handling out some of the notifications from there. But it's going to say, hey, we've identified an issue. Follow this one if you care. And if you do care, then you'll only get the notifications in their defined workflow. So it's discovery, first investigation, remediation, resolution. And they only provide updates at key milestones during that process. So,
Awesome. One thing that I've also noticed in my experience is that a lot of times you have to set some boundaries to some of the customers, right? So, you have your communications going out at a specific cadence. You're being fully transparent, but we want to make sure that the villagers aren't taking the pitchforks and trying to burn the castle down for no reason. Obviously, everyone wants the service request or the incident resolved as soon as possible. But we're going to make sure that everyone's being, professional about it, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, to be honest, I think boundaries probably one of the reasons why you end up with such bad sentiment in certain cases, right? Because maybe you set the expectation and never met the expectation. That could be on one side, but it also might be that just people have these behaviors that kind of do, and you've never put in the barrier, be like, actually, Ed, like we aren't going to give you something hourly. We are doing this purely on milestone.
Right.
And we've not hit the next milestone.
Right.
So I think that is a level, and you have to set those expectations. Again, I think that kind of comes into the contract it might have with your customers.
Contact, yeah, get it in writing and get it so everyone knows what the expectations are.
But I also think every time that there might be a breach of a behavior, you have to realign that in the PII that you're going to do.
Yes. Post a review, what happened and why did it happen.
Exactly. So you're going to turn around and be like, okay, like this happened again. We'll talk about it. I may we will future ones, but it's not a blame game. We're accountable for these actions, and we need to address these actions. So then you can realign the boundaries and making sure that you're taking care of them. But I do think it's a really important fallout.
Absolutely.
You need to have them defined because you don't want to fall into the trap of the wrong expectations. So I think we've spoken about making sure that the right boundaries are done, the right frequency is in, that we have kind of addressed the rail of who needs to send it and when to send them. Yep. But what do you put in a message? What would your first thoughts be if I said, hey, Ed, I need to start doing these?
Yeah, and some of this ties back to what we said earlier about if you have templates defined for specific incident types. So your step 1s, 2, 3s, you can make sure that, you have items such as a unique incident ID, full description of what the incident is, who's working on which group is working on the actual incident. So everything's fully transparent on who's doing what. And then again, you could also put in there like the next notification will come out, and
again, setting the expectations. That's a really good thing.
Right.
I think it's important that I think you don't want to overwhelm the email notification. You don't want to be able to say, we're checking this log and here's the log file that we're checking. Right? You to give all labels.
This is the stack, so
this is real living, right? You don't want to you don't want to be providing that kind of stuff, but you do need to provide enough context where you're not making more questions.
Yes.
Right? But never too much. So it's going to be a fine line. I do think it differs from company to company.
Yeah.
But you're right. You need a unique ID so that someone knows which one that you're talking about and when. You need to say who's in charge and handling that perspective. And then I think this is when it starts, like that description might be, here's the product, here's the particular area of the product, and a very brief, like 240 character style X post.
Maybe even who's being impacted by this kind of thing.
Yeah, region.
Yeah,
exactly. Okay, that's a good. Exactly. You don't want to give anything kind of more away from that. What I have seen is almost like someone's done it almost by bullet point. Is be like region, service, Jira, and just leave it, and then then you get your one liner.
Still do more detail on that. Yeah. Yep, exactly.
Have you seen anything different?
That's what I've seen mostly in my experience and recommendations as far as when you are designing out your communications protocol and sequence.
So great, we know what we're putting in the message now, but how do you word it? Like, I know we're all in business, and I know that we need to remain professional, but I've seen not funny ones, but certainly more light-hearted ways of handling the communication style.
Well, yeah.
And then very.
Yeah. So because you don't want to downplay the severity of the incident that's happening. But a little levity every now and then isn't too bad. But again, the tone has to be, obviously, professional, very clear. Or you just throw everything to Chat GPT and you'll get everything.
Yeah.
Fitting, don't do that.
Maybe don't put all your company secrets in GVC.
Yeah.
I do think that's important to remind yourself that you need to remain professional. But actually, I think based on your experiences with your customers, if you are more lighthearted, you may be like, we're experiencing this, we'll get it up, and it's just the way you might handle it. Yeah. So, but I think that's incredibly important that you again remain uniform in the way and the information and the way you talk to people.
Right. Right. Exactly. And it's with anything that obviously we're going to be talking about in this series here, you're going to have to think through and design everything, in this case, your communications for incident management. So who are we going to notify? How are we going to notify? We're going to build templates. What's the cadence? So you have a lot to think about when designing this out, but once you have it done and implemented, it'll make your job a lot easier. Everyone will know what the expectations are. and hopefully, make it a better experience when an incident has to come up.
Great. All right, Ed. I think for us, that's pretty much about smoke signals. I think that's probably the best detail that we can provide. So thank you, everyone, for joining us on our first episode of Beyond the Flame. We have a lot more coming in this season, as well as the entire podcast series. So make sure to join us on future episodes. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.